Faramir, oh Faramir, what did Peter Jackson do to you? Why did he totally change you from your perfection in the book? Well, it's no surprise to anyone that Faramir is an absolutely and utterly different character in the book versus the movie. And I'm going to start off by saying something that might be a little controversial. Maybe wildly controversial, actually. I don't mind him in the movie. Now, I still think he is actually one of the more complex and interesting characters in the entire film franchise, but his book character is so much better. He is not weaker than his brother. He's not insecure like he is in the movie, and would he ever, under any circumstances, try to take the ring from Frodo. I mean, he literally says it himself, and I'll talk about that in a bit. And for this whole week, I've been brainstorming essays that I wanted to write about how vastly different of a character he is from the book. And I've had like 5 in my head, and I all want to smush them into one. I want to talk about how he is truly one of the most incredible characters in the book that we see. And I wanted to talk in a bunch of different essays about his wisdom and how he's just really, like, he's a wizard. Thank you, Sam. And how he dealt with the temptation versus how Boromir dealt with it. But again, rather than writing 5 individual essays, I figured maybe it's more fun for me to just walk through the entire chapter. And this is the prominent chapter of Faramir, which is the Window of the West, and just show how J.R.R. Tolkien created an incredible character in just one chapter. Like a single chapter is all he needs to create someone who is universally adored in J.R.R. Tolkien fandom. And he does this by showing you the actual character of Faramir. So, without further ado, actually, one quick ado. Make sure you do subscribe and like the video as well, because that'll gain more traction for this video. I know it's a long one, but most of my takes are on this channel as I read for the first time in my life. So if you want to vicariously read or vicariously live through someone who is reading this for the first time in their life and like re-experience what that was like, make sure you subscribe. Lots of takes on this channel. Now, without further ado, let's walk through this brilliant chapter and show just how brilliant Faramir is and how brilliant J.R.R. Tolkien is in the creation of this beautiful, beautiful man. So the chapter starts off on an intimidating fashion. Frodo is put in the middle of this half circle with Faramir, and Faramir is at the front, questioning him. The book describes it this way. They sat in a wide semicircle, between the arms of which Faramir was seated on the ground, while Frodo stood before him. It looked strangely like the trial of a prisoner. And Sam's initial take on Faramir is that he could see Faramir's face, which was now unmasked, and it was stern and commanding, and a keen wit lay behind his searching glance. Doubt was in the gray eyes that gazed steadily at Frodo. So initially, this man seems kind of questionable at the moment. As a reader, when you initially start this, you're thinking that he's important. He also seems wise, but he's also very skeptical of Frodo and the whole story that Frodo presents about where he was earlier, which was a quick version of what he was doing in like Ithilien. Like that was the whole interrogation that they had in the prior chapter. It wasn't long because they had to go fight. But then Faramir jumps out of the gate early and just starts questioning him here. He says, "But it was at the coming of the halfling that Isildur's bane should waken. Or, so one must read the words," he insisted. "If then you are the halfling that was named, doubtless you brought this thing, whatever it may be, to the council of which you speak. And there Boromir saw it. Do you deny it?" So they're talking about Isildur's bane here at the whole council of Elrond, and Frodo's not really giving any information about what it is. And so Faramir is questioning him a ton on it. And then shortly after this, there is really the first bit of character development and character study that I think the chapter has of Faramir. Frodo mentions how Aragorn possesses the sword. So he has this broken sword that was reforged at Rivendell. And this is exciting news to everyone around this half circle. But J.R.R. Tolkien makes us a bit suspicious of Faramir because his face is just unmoved. It's a really cool section in the text that says, "A murmur of astonishment ran through all the ring of men. Some cried aloud, 'The sword of Elendil! The sword of Elendil comes to Minas Tirith! Great tidings!' But Faramir's face was unmoved." So here he is ramping up the suspicion. And Tolkien does this so well in the whole chapter too, because you are just constantly at this like roller coaster of emotions, questioning this man. He proves himself trustworthy, then you're not sure of him because he does one small little thing. And he does this at every turn. There is like not a single sentence or paragraph where you're not siding or going against Faramir. And this is the first turn that's coming up. They start talking about Boromir and the revelation that Boromir is dead. And it's a tragic passage, but the book says this: "Were you a friend of Boromir?" Vividly before Frodo's mind came the memory of Boromir's assault upon him. And for a moment he hesitated, which that hesitation is going to be important later. Faramir's eyes, watching him, grew harder. "Boromir was a valiant member of our company," said Frodo at length. "Yes, I was his friend for my part." Faramir smiled grimly, that doesn't bode well. "Then you would grieve to learn that Boromir is dead." "I would grieve indeed," said Frodo. Then, catching the look in Faramir's eyes, he faltered. "Dead," he said. "Do you mean that he is dead and that you knew it? You have been trying to trap me in words, playing with me? Or are you now trying to snare me with a falsehood?" "I would not even snare an orc with a falsehood," said Faramir. And that is the vital line. This man is out here saying that he wouldn't even snare an orc with a falsehood. He is so true and noble that he doesn't even want to deceive the enemy to defeat them. He'd probably rather just beat them straight up. And I really think this shows the character of Faramir, and how from this point on you can trust at the very least the words that he says to be true. And that is a huge part of all like narrative speech in novel writing. If you can trust what a character says, you're not going to constantly doubt who is trustworthy or not in the story. He's not trying to deceive Frodo. He simply wants some information about what's going on. He is trying to fill in the gaps for Boromir's death. And Faramir's real motivation becomes plain as the chapter goes on. But then, as soon as we start to trust Faramir here, another thing happens that kind of puts the reader ill at ease. Because Samwise, a character we have all grown to love as we read the book, stands up for Frodo in the midst of all this questioning, and Faramir kind of shuts him down. This is what the book says. "Begging your pardon, Mr. Frodo," he said, "but this has gone on long enough. He's no right to talk to you so, after all you've gone through. As much for his good, and all these great men, as for anyone else." And so Sam goes on to say that they need to see sense, and they need to judge justly and rightly about Frodo and get on letting them get on their way. And then Sam says something slightly offensive to the entire group here. He says this: "But it's a pity that folk as talk about fighting the enemy can't let others do their bit in their own way without interfering. He'd be mighty pleased if he could see you now. Think he'd got a new friend, he would." And so that's a bit offensive because he's not really he's not saying that these men are letting other people fight the enemy in their own way. And then the book goes on to show Faramir's response, which is simultaneously hilarious, but it makes us trust Faramir maybe a little bit less. And more at the same time. He says, "Patience," said Faramir, "but without anger. Do not speak before your master, whose wit is greater than yours. And I do not need any to teach me of our peril." Which kind of hurt me as a reader. I love Sam. I don't want anyone insulting him. But at the same time, Faramir says this without anger. It's like he's judged the two of these characters in the short amount of time and knows that Frodo possesses more wisdom than Sam does. And Sam is just kind of like a simple-minded person. And that's really why you love Sam in the story. And this little tidbit will come back later because it's one of the most shocking moments of this whole chapter. And it was, out of everything that I've read in the book, this was one of those moments where my jaw just dropped at the stupidity of Sam in this moment. Or not the stupidity, like the naivety, like this is why you love Sam, but also it's frustrating. I'll talk about that in a bit. Faramir then goes on to dispel the suspicion of him because while he shoots Sam down, he does this without anger. And then what he says next shows that he is wise and patient to judge. He needs to know the facts here. And so he says, "Even so, I spare a brief time in order to judge justly in a hard matter. Were I as hasty as you, I might have slain you long ago. For I am commanded to slay all whom I find in this land without leave of the Lord of Gondor. But I do not slay man or beast needlessly, and not gladly, even when it is needed. Neither do I talk in vain, so be comforted. Sit by your master and be silent. So after he scolds Sam like a little school child, I think he's really wise in saying that this is a hard matter and he must judge correctly, and so he must be patient and take his time. Faramir is mysterious at this point, and we don't really know who he fully is as a character, but he's intriguing at the very least. And while he's not just like this character we fall in love with, I think from the first line, he is very wise. At the very least, I think anyone reading this text at this moment, as suspicious as you may be of Faramir, you cannot deny that he's acting very wisely here. And I think too, one of my favorite moments in this entire chapter is right here. I think this might be maybe just like a silly point, but you know that someone who doesn't slay man or beast needlessly is a good man. I think this really even goes beyond being just like an animal lover. I have a dog that I love, and I love hearing that he doesn't slay man or beast needlessly, especially the beast part. I mean, especially the man part, but the beast part is interesting too. And I think this is important because I have some friends who are really into hunting. They love hunting. And all of them are this way toward animals. They don't do these things needlessly, believing that the slaying of something kind of just randomly without using every little bit of it is harsh and needless and actually gross. One of my friends in college was a huge hunter. He's the biggest that I've ever known. And the angriest that I've ever seen him get in my entire life was when we were going for a hike in the woods, and he came across a dead deer with an arrow just jutting out of it. He kept saying in a fury, "You find that deer that you shot no matter how long you were out there." He was furious. I've never seen him that mad. And I think this fits with this moment here for Faramir, because he values life, even the life of his enemy. And he does not slay beast or being needlessly. And when he does it, he's not happy about doing it. This is the exact kind of character that I think is admirable and excellent. This is one of those small lines that really show the goodness of a person. And Tolkien does this excellently through exposition and through like other people's perspectives for how they view a person. He never does this through a narratival voice. Some of the people in this series who have bonds with animals, I think, are the best characters, and I think Tolkien even recognizes that. You look at someone like Tom Bombadil and Fatty Lumpkin, which is maybe a weird one, or Gandalf and Shadowfax, or Sam and Bill the Pony. I think this line shows that Faramir here is great for this. And the next part of this conversation here is an interrogation of Frodo over the death of Boromir. And notice how quickly this switches. The conversation goes from Isildur's bane, and they're talking about that. And that's really the more interesting thing that they should talk about. And then all of a sudden the conversation pivots full circle, well, 180 degrees, to the death of Boromir. And the whole conversation about Boromir is very telling. And it seems like Faramir is distinctively having this touch of divinity on him. And I'll talk about that in a bit. But he seems to be chosen for something. Frodo asks him in the previous chapter, "Are the riddling words known to you that Boromir brought to Rivendell?" Frodo replied. "Seek for the sword that was broken. In Imladris it dwells." "The words are known indeed," said Faramir in astonishment. "It is some token of your truth that you also know them." Now, then, during the questioning of Frodo, they have this whole conversation about really the death of Boromir. Again, it goes from there talking about Isildur's bane, which all of us think is probably more interesting, and then it pivots to talking about the death of Boromir. And then you get this big reveal that he's the brother, but there's a lot of questions that happen in this, and I made a whole other video about this, but Faramir then wades through the Anduin and kind of seems to come across the boat that Boromir died in and was sent over the waterfall just accidentally. Again, it seems to be like the boat almost was beckoned toward him. And this just further feels like it's confirming the fact that Faramir is not only trustworthy, and not that we're fully sure that he's trustworthy right now, but he just seems to be chosen or like has a divine touch on him. And again, if you want my full deep dive about that whole story, I wrote an essay like 2 days ago about that. It was a really wild story in this chapter. And one thing I keep pointing out here is Tolkien never explicitly tells you how to feel about Faramir, which is one reason I really love this chapter. I'm just discovering this for myself. Other authors tend to put like key indicators for how you should feel about a character, but everything is hidden in this text. And this is the classic example of show, don't tell. And the times that he does tell, he embeds it not in the narrator's voice, but in the character's voice. Like how Sam thought he was firm, but had doubt in his eyes. Now, this makes us question why. And so it also makes us question this man and who this man really is. And then Out of this, we just kind of come to this conclusion about this guy rather than have an author tell us how we should feel about someone or how we should feel about a character. So we get Sam's take on what he thinks about Faramir, and so we can judge justly based on our perception of Sam and then our new perception of how we view Faramir. And this is such a better way to write, because what Tolkien does is significantly better than a lot of other writers, because he assumes that we're smart and can handle things. And it makes the reading experience so much better, and it makes it up for interpretation, which makes it more fun for, I think, the fandom, whether you like a character or not. It's a great little area of discussion and debate. But this little section after it is where it gets juicy, and the movie left a lot of stuff out. And the end of the conversation, when all the men are having dinner, Faramir tells them, "I broke off our speech together," said Faramir. "Not only because time pressed, as Master Samwise had reminded me, but also because we were drawing near to matters that were better not debated openly before many men. It was for that reason that I turned rather to the matter of my brother and let be Isildur's bane. You were not wholly frank with me, Frodo." This right here is the brilliance of Faramir. And this is one of the, again, every reason in this chapter is a reason that I love him. But this is one of the biggest reasons, because notice too how Tolkien is messing with our emotions, because simultaneously in this paragraph, he's saying he's so wise. Like, I'm thinking, man, Faramir really knows what he's talking about. And then he confronts Frodo saying that he's not frank with him and he needs the truth here. And if he's anything like his brother Boromir, we already are a bit hesitant of him because of Boromir's temptation. But this singular moment when Faramir has enough wisdom to know that he shouldn't ask this question in front of a group of men. And then Frodo, his hesitancy here too, because they talk about Boromir and his temptation with the ring, and he gives this really, really interesting line. He says, "You spoke with skill in a hard place and wisely. It seemed to me, but I learned or guessed more from you than your words said. You were not friendly with Boromir, or you did not part in friendship. You and Master Samwise too, I guess, have some grievance. Now, I loved him dearly, and would gladly avenge his death, yet I knew him well. Isildur's bane, I would hazard, that Isildur's bane lay between you, and was the cause of contentions in your company. Clearly, it's a mighty heirloom of some sort, and such things do not breed peace among confederates, not if aught may be learned from ancient tales. Do I not hit near the mark?" "Near," said Frodo, "but not in the gold. There was no contention in our company, though there was doubt which way we should take from the Emyn Muil. Be that as it may, ancient tales teach us also the peril of rash words concerning such things as heirlooms." "Ah, then it is as I thought. Your trouble was with Boromir alone. He wished this thing brought to Minas Tirith. Alas, it is a crooked fate that seals your lips, who saw him last and holds from me that which I long to know. What was in his heart and thought in his latest hours? Whether he erred or no, of this I am sure. He died well, achieving some good thing. His face was more beautiful even than in life." And here is where my jaw started to really get unhinged from my skull in this whole section. This man is critiquing his brother with perfection. He knows the ins and outs of his brother. He understands his weakness. He understands his strength. He understands what he would do at the end of his life, because his face is radiant in this boat. He understands that it's the simple pause that Frodo gave before he answered the questions of him being friends with Boromir was a reason for questioning what Boromir's motive really was. So he knows how to decipher people so well. But one huge change is that he does not know about the ring, unlike the movie when he tortures Gollum because of it, which is a wild choice that they made. But I'll talk about that change in a bit. But at the moment, I think Faramir is just growing in our minds slowly as this incredibly trustworthy character, because he's just wise and he knows how to decipher conversation. But also I'm a little suspicious of how well he's able to do this. These back and forths, and honestly, the biggest back and forth will come in a little bit. But at this moment, our trust is growing in him. But it's like faltering a little bit because you can interpret this in a different way. Just because of this paragraph here is when I really start to trust him. When he talks about the temptation of Boromir and he honors him in his death, saying that he wants to avenge him, but he also knows the weakness of his brother. And later he says this, which is, I think, really important. "And this I remember of Boromir as a boy, when we together learned the tale of our sires and the history of our city. That always it displeased him that his father was not king. How many hundreds of years needs it to make a steward a king if the king returns not? He asked. A few years, maybe, in other places of less royalty, my father answered. In Gondor, 10,000 years would not suffice. Alas, poor Boromir, does that not tell you something of him? And this here was Boromir's issue. He wanted his family line to be the one on the throne, not simply the stewards of the throne. And he wanted that power for himself. And he thought that the ring could give him the power he needed to get onto the throne. I think that's like the clearest interpretation of that. But their conversation circles back to this later. They take a brief detour and they talk about Gandalf's visit to the city, which is really interesting because Faramir is kind of eavesdropping as Gandalf is doing his research, which I thought was really, really fascinating. He goes and studies some of the texts and some of the scrolls that he was studying. But Faramir navigates this whole conversation with Frodo and essentially decides what the ring is without really saying it explicitly. It's a really interesting bit of conversation, but his wisdom in knowing what the danger of this thing is really incredible. Not even Gandalf in the beginning saw this as being a token of evil, I think. And the lines in the book are just so good. This is what it says at the end of their conversation. What in truth this thing is, I cannot yet guess, but some heirloom of power. And peril it must be. A fell weapon, perchance, devised by the Dark Lord. If it were a thing that gave advantage in battle, I can believe that Boromir, the proud and fearless, often rash, ever anxious for the victory of Minas Tirith, and his own glory therein, might desire such a thing, and be allured by it, which again is such a brilliant analysis of his brother. He knows his brother so well and the desires that he had. I loved Boromir for his love of Minas Tirith and for his love of his own glory being the thing that led to his own downfall, because it makes him a very relatable character. Faramir seems to have an almost deeper love of Minas Tirith, which I'll talk about in a bit, but not a huge love of himself. At least he just has a very healthy love for himself. He doesn't seem to want glory for himself. And again, this is more interesting in the next part for what he says. Alas, that ever he went on that errand, I should have been chosen by my father and the elders. But he put himself forward as being the older and the hardier, both true, and he would not be stayed. Faramir is saying that here he should have been chosen on this mission to go onto this quest, to go to Rivendell and to be part of this fellowship, which is crazy. And it's only because it only became my thinking now how interesting of a story this would have been had Faramir rather than Boromir been chosen on this journey. And long story short, I actually think it would have gone well, but I also think it was divine providence that Faramir stayed, because I think Faramir is more needed at this section in the story right here. Everything seems to be guided by providence and by the god of Middle-earth, because it almost feels like they were here guided by God or providence or whatever it might be, by fate, for Faramir to assist them in this singular moment. But I'll talk about that at the end with one of the most important moments, I think, in this entire narrative. But right after this line with Faramir comes perhaps the best line that he has in the entire chapter, and one that instantly makes us trust him. It is such a good line. It's a lot of people's favorite line. He says, "But fear no more. I would not take this thing if it lay by the highway. Not were Minas Tirith falling in ruin, and I alone could save her. So using the weapon of the Dark Lord for her good and my glory. No, I do not wish for such triumphs, Frodo, son of Drogo." Faramir in the movies is weaker. He's still an interesting character, but he's so much weaker, terrified of his father's lack of approval and constantly desiring that. But here he shows his cards for who he truly is in the book in an instant. That he wouldn't take this ring under any circumstances. He doesn't know it's a ring now, but he wouldn't take this weapon for any circumstances. Not if all of Minas Tirith were about to fall and he alone could save it. Now, the interesting thing for this conversation is that he just says this. They are just words. And we'll see that later on his actions, if his actions truly become what his words make him out to be, because he is tempted later. But at the moment, by his words, he just seems incredible. This line just shows how firm and steadfast and good he is. Faramir, after this line, tells Frodo of his motivation, and again, it's the same as Boromir's without the pride. And this is why I love Boromir so much too. I was just talking about this before, but he just seems like such a noble person, but has deep pride issues. He's frailer and weaker than Faramir, and he's more flawed than Faramir, but he's also maybe more relatable. But Faramir is just a complete package. And this is what he talks about in his motivation and his love for Gondor. For myself, said Faramir, I would see the white tree in flower again in the courts of the kings, and the silver crown return, and Minas Tirith in peace. Minas Anor again as of old, full of light, high and fair, beautiful as a queen among queens, not a mistress of many slaves, nay, not even a kind of mistress of willing slaves, which is another incredible line because he wants this kingdom to be without slaves, willing or not. He wants a kingdom that is a free kingdom. Honestly, I think he would be a great king. And maybe there's another essay in there about what if Faramir actually became king. But he keeps on going and it says this: war must be, while we defend our lives against the destroyer who would devour all. But I do not love the bright sword for its sharpness, nor the arrow for its swiftness, nor the warrior for his glory. I love only that which they defend, the city of the men of Numenor. And I would have loved her for her memory, her ancient tree, her beauty, and her present wisdom. Not feared, save as many men fear the dignity of a man, old and wise. Just everything that Faramir starts to say now is beautiful, like every word that comes out of his mouth. And everything only makes him more and more likable in all of our minds as readers. He's slowly reaching this echelon of one of our favorite characters, which is really interesting because things that come later with the temptation of Faramir in a moment make you think that he's going to abandon all of this and take the ring from Frodo. And I'll get there in a second. But at least this was my read and my interpretation, because there's some key verbs and words that Tolkien uses that are just so good. But goodness, it's just, he's such a great character at this moment. And the things that he says are all so beautiful. But after this little moment with Faramir, he tells them to go get some sleep and that they'll have dinner in a bit. Sam doesn't get his sleep, but he buries his knuckles into his face just to keep himself awake because he has trust issues. Now, I'm kind of with him, but Faramir has put me at ease here, which is exactly why Sam is untrusting, because he's so at ease. It's like Aragorn. Sometimes the enemies seem fair, but are really foul. In another essay, I wrote about this moment, and I had some comments of people saying that Sam wasn't drunk and he wasn't tipsy. He was just tired. And I do think that's kind of the true, and that's kind of the case, but I definitely think he was still tipsy and to some extent a little bit drunk at the same time. It says in the text that the wine coursed through their veins, but I digress. So before the meal, they have this really beautiful moment that shows the reverence that Faramir has. And this has become one of my favorite moments. The men say this kind of prayer. And again, it has become something that I think I'm going to embed into every little part of my life. I love this so much. It's become the sign-off for my Lord of the Rings videos now. He says, before they ate, Faramir and all his men turned and faced west in a moment of silence. Faramir signed to Frodo and Sam that they should do likewise. So we always do, he said, as they sat down. We look toward Numenor that was, and beyond to Elvenhome that is, and to that which is beyond Elvenhome, and will ever be. Oh, I love that. It is just one of my favorite things in this whole text. It's like just brimming with beauty. It shows the devotion of Faramir too, because it's not just this throwaway line that you get that's like really beautiful. It really shows the reverence and devotion that Faramir has to his people and to what lays beyond. It shows his hope. It shows so much in such a short amount of time of writing. Again, this is a masterclass in Tolkien's ability to show who a character is just by his actions or by his customs. And after dinner, when Sam and Frodo have had their third helpings, they have this private conversation with Faramir, and this is really where it gets juicy. I think this is probably one of the best parts of the entirety of this chapter, because this touches on this whole conversation that they have after dinner focus and touches on a lot of topics. But one of the first things they start to do is they talk about like the lore, the kingdom of Numenor, and really what happened. Now, I don't know the lore of this, but this single diagnosis that Faramir gives of his people and the issues of Numenor made me brimming with excitement just to get to the Silmarillion so I can know more about what goes on in the entire realm of Middle-earth. Like, I cannot tell you how excited I am. Like, I want to savor every moment of Lord of the Rings, but I'm so excited for even reading The Hobbit, and especially for reading the Silmarillion. I think I'm going to love it. But right before this, Frodo takes a sharp detour for Boromir because they start to talk about Boromir. And Faramir says that he wishes Boromir died in Moria with Gandalf so that he wouldn't have fallen into temptation later. And then Frodo is like, hold on, let's talk about something else. Which is interesting too, because Faramir really wants his brother to have died in dignity. And he knows that he died in dignity, but their quick turn is to the people of Numenor. This is what the text says. What hope have we, said Faramir. It is long since we had any hope. The sword of Elendil, if it returns indeed, may rekindle it. But I do not think that will do more than put off the evil day. Unless other help, unlooked for, also comes. From elves or men. I love that he's not really thinking about hobbits, but hobbits are his main source of help there. For the enemy increases and we decrease. We are a failing people, a springless autumn. The men of Numenor were settled far and wide on the shores and seaward regions of the great lands. But for the most part, they fell into evils and follies. Many became enamored of the darkness and the black arts. Some were given over wholly to idleness and ease. And some fought among themselves until they were conquered in their weakness by the wild men. It is not said that evil arts were ever practiced in Gondor, or that the Nameless One was ever named in honor there. And the old wisdom and beauty brought out of the west remain long in the realm of the sons of Elendil, the fair. And they linger there still. Yet even so, it was Gondor that brought about its own decay, falling by degrees into dotage, and thinking that the enemy was asleep who was only banished, not destroyed. Death was ever present, because the Numenorians still, as they had in their old kingdom and so lost it, hungered after endless life unchanging. Kings made tombs more splendid than houses of the living, and counted old names in the rolls of their descent dearer than the names of sons. Childless lords sat in aged halls, musing on heraldry. In secret chambers, withered men compounded strong elixirs, or in high cold towers asked questions of the stars. And the last king of the line of Anarion had no heir. It's just another brilliant part here, because Faramir, on top of being wise, on top of being trustworthy, on top of being a brave soldier, on top of not wanting the ring at all, is also a lore master. Is there anything that this guy doesn't do? And more than that, he can interpret history and know why the things that happened in history succeeded or failed. He is absolutely brilliant in this whole chapter, and really seems to not have a single flaw. I love this man so much. And after this deep dive conversation, he turns to elves. And one hilarious moment that I loved in these books so much is the ferocity of Gimli to correct people and correct anyone who disparages or talks badly about the Lady of Lorien, Galadriel. Honestly, it is a key indicator for whether a character is good or not for how they actually think about her and how they talk about her. Éomer actually insults her quickly, but then after that quickly corrects himself, and Gimli and him kind of get along after that. Wormtongue doesn't correct himself, and Gimli rightly wants to rip his head off. Here, this group starts talking about the Lady of Lorien, and the conversation shows Faramir's nobility and honor because he honors her. And I want to read a bit of this too, because one, it is so good, and two, because it'll lead us to one of the last points, which is the moment for when our trust in Faramir wavers to a probably the largest degree in this whole chapter. In a few of the words that J.R.R. Tolkien uses, he writes a bit of fear into this character. And this is what the whole entire thing says. And ever and anonymously will one go in secret to Lothlorien, seldom to return. Not I, for I deem it perilous now for mortal man willfully to seek out the elder people. Yet I envy that you have spoken with the White Lady, the Lady of Lorien, Galadriel, cried Sam. You should see her indeed, you should, sir. I am only a hobbit, and gardening's my job at home, sir, if you understand me. And I'm not much good at poetry. Not at making it. A bit of a comic rhyme perhaps now and again, but not real poetry. So I can't tell you what I mean. It ought to be sung. You'd have to get Strider, Aragorn that is, or old Mr. Bilbo for that. But I wish I could make a song about her. Beautiful she is, sir. Lovely. Sometimes like a great tree in flower. Sometimes like a white daffodilly. Small and slender like. Hard as diamonds, soft as moonlight, warm as sunlight, cold as frost in the stars. Proud and far off as the snow mountain. And as merry as any lass I ever saw with daisies in her hair in springtime. But that's a lot of nonsense, which I think is funny because that's actually very, very poetic. And wide of my mark. Then she must be lovely indeed, said Faramir. Perilously fair. I don't know about perilous, said Sam. It strikes me that folk take their peril with them into Lorien, and finds it there because they've brought it. But perhaps you could call her perilous. Because she's so strong in herself. You could dash yourself to pieces on her, like a ship on a rock, or drown yourself like a hobbit in a river. But neither rock nor river would be to blame. Now he stopped and went red in the face. Yes, now Boromir, you would say, said Faramir. What would you say? He took his peril with him? Yes, sir. Begging your pardon. And a fine man as your brother was, if I may say so. But you've been warm on the scent all along. Now I watched Boromir and listened to him. From Rivendell all down the road, looking after my master, as you'll understand. And not meaning any harm to Boromir, and it's my opinion that in Lorien he first saw clearly what I guessed sooner. What he wanted. From the moment he first saw it, he wanted the enemy's ring. Sam! Cried Frodo aghast. He had fallen deep into his own thoughts for a while and came out of them suddenly and too late. Sam! Being tipsy and tired and talkative and a lovely hobbit, let slip about the ring, which made my jaw drop. This was a wild moment. I was genuinely shocked when this part came out in the book because it's nowhere in the movie, obviously. But this is when we have like our faith and our trust that we've built for Faramir in this chapter. It begins to waver a little bit. This is what the book says. Now look here, sir, he turned, facing up to Faramir with all the courage that he could muster. Don't you go taking advantage of my master because the servants know better than a fool. You've spoken very handsome all along. Put me off my guard, talking of elves and all. But handsome is as handsome does, we say. Now is a chance to show your quality. Which, I love that Sam is the one to talk about this little quality of Faramir here. I think it's so great. So it seems, said Faramir, slowly and very softly, with a strange smile. Now, the first question, what is that strange smile? Is he going to take the ring? Now that he knows about the ring? Now he knows the power of Middle-earth that is literally right in front of him? Or all those things that he said before, just words to get to this point so that he can reach out and take the ring? Is he going to deceive them like his brother did by falling into temptation? What's the temptation that Faramir is going to endure here? Is he going to endure it or is he going to fall? The book goes on. So that is the answer to all the riddles. The one ring that was thought to have perished from the world. And Boromir tried to take it by force, and you escaped, and ran all the way to me. And here in the wild I have you, 2 halflings, and a host of men at my call, and the ring of rings. A pretty stroke of fortune. A chance for Faramir, captain of Gondor, to show his quality. Ha! He stood up, very tall and stern, his gray eyes glinting. And honestly, I think in this moment you think that he's actually going to take the ring. It feels like Peter Jackson and co. really took these lines to heart and made Faramir a very easily swayed and easily tempted and insecure individual. But the book goes on. Frodo and Sam sprang from their stools and set themselves side by side with their backs to the wall, fumbling for their sword hilts. There was a silence. All the men in the cave stopped talking and looked toward them in wonder, which, again, you feel like here a fight might actually break out. But Faramir sat down again in his chair and began to laugh quietly, and then suddenly became grave again. And just the way that Tolkien writes this next part is so brilliant. His words and sentence order really makes you kind of doubt your trust in Faramir. He says, "Alas for Boromir. It was too sore a trial," he said. "How you have increased my sorrow, you two strange wanderers from a far country, bearing the peril of men. But you are less judges of men than I of halflings. We are truth speakers, we men of Gondor. We boast seldom, and then perform or die in the attempt. Not if I found it on the highway would I take it," I said, "even if I were such a man as to desire this thing. And even though I knew not clearly what this thing was when I spoke, still I should take those words as a vow, and be held by them. But I am not such a man. Or I am wise enough to know that there are some perils for which a man must flee." Now, I think this is interesting because it's like an interpretive issue. It sounds to some extent like he's actually saying that he should be held by this vow as a man, but I am no such man, so I'm not going to be held by this vow. Or that he's not wise enough to know the peril that he should flee from in this moment. But simultaneously, this is like, maybe this isn't really the true reading of the text. I think the true reading of the text is actually the exact opposite. Faramir is sitting there looking at the ring and saying, if I were a man who desires this thing, then I should be held by my vow to not have taken it before. But I'm no man who desires this. And I'm also not a man who isn't wise enough to know that this temptation is something that I should flee from. Boromir fell in a few weeks traveling with the group. He let his temptation eat him alive. And especially in the Galadriel section, when it seems like Galadriel almost offers him up the ring in order to save Gondor and Minas Tirith. That's what a lot of people's interpretation of that thing is. And Boromir is almost driven mad by this idea. He sits in the boats on the way down the Anduin, and he's just muttering to himself like a crazy man. Sam is actually a bit afraid of him in those moments. But Faramir is the better version of Boromir. Not succumbing to the temptation, but redeeming the family name. And not only running from temptation, but overwhelming it. Now, if you know like theology or Christianity at all, it's almost like the idea of recapitulation with Adam and into Christ, where one fails and the other succeeds. And this little instance in Lord of the Rings is such an interesting part of the story here too, because at this moment, it almost feels like Faramir will fall into temptation and he will take the ring. But he sits back down with resolve in his heart, not to take the ring. And this is where his words and his actions meet, and you trusted him because of his words, and now you trust him because of his actions, and he becomes like the most trustworthy character ever. He is made up of some sturdy material here. He is a man above all men. And so Faramir goes on to say, "Sit at peace and be comforted, Samwise. If you seem to have stumbled, think that it was fated to be so. Your heart is shrewd as well as faithful, and saw clearer than your eyes. For strange though it may seem, it was safe to declare this to me. It may even help that master that you love. It shall turn to his good, if it is in my power. So be comforted, but do not even name this thing aloud again. Once is enough. No more tonight. Sleep, both of you, in peace, if you can. Fear not, I do not wish to see it, or touch it, or know more of it than I know, which is enough. Lest peril perchance waylay me and I fall lower in the test than Frodo, son of Drogo. Go now to rest. But first tell me only, if you will, whither you wish to go, and what to do. For I must watch, and wait, and think. Time passes. In the morning we must each go swiftly on the ways appointed to us." So he sets their mind at ease, and he's talking about this idea of fate, about how each one has a way appointed to them. But then another one of my favorite moments comes at the end of this chapter when he gets in a short conversation with Sam right before bed. This is a really, really beautiful moment. This is what it says. Another bed was set beside him for his servant. Sam hesitated for a moment, then bowing very low. "Good night, Captain, my lord," he said. "You took the chance, sir." "Did I so?" said Faramir. "Yes, sir, and showed your quality, the very highest." Faramir smiled. "A pert servant, Master Samwise. But nay, the praise of the praiseworthy is above all rewards. Yet there was not in this to praise. I had no lore or desire to do other than I have done. Ah, well, sir, said Sam. You said my master had an elvish air, and that was good and true, but I can say this. You have an air too, sir. That reminds me of well, Gandalf, of wizards. Maybe, said Faramir. Maybe you discern from far away the air of Numenor. Good night. How good is this? You're a wizard, Faramir. Sam understands the wisdom of this man, and I think we do understand this as well. And it's tragic to me that this isn't in the movies, because this chapter just shows this perfect character. And for J.R.R. Tolkien, it is a perfect way to show this really trustworthy character that he builds in both word and in action. In just one chapter, we come to love this person. He is so noble and wise and cunning and strong. And he is his brother, but just without his brother's desire for power or glory or temptation of the ring. He is perfect. And I don't know, maybe I'll find a little flaw in his character later on, but at the moment, I cannot find a dang thing. But that's my Faramir essay. Less essay and more just a walk through this chapter, because I wanted to nerd about every little detail in this chapter. And it's like, it was so good. I just wanted to it just felt like a reread of this chapter, but it was just so brilliant. But again, if you got this far in the video, make sure you like the video, subscribe to the channel for more of my first time takes and on this text that I'm reading for the first time. You can become a member if you want. And remember, we look toward Numenor that was and beyond to Elvenhome that is, and to that which is beyond Elvenhome and will ever be. I'll see you in the next one.